right, good morning, everybody. How are you all doing? Good. All right, we're gonna jump right into our presentation. So one of our presenters, when we were doing everything remotely during COVID, was John. He had given us an update. I think it was December of 2020, and so a lot has happened in about a year and a half. So. But John Dobken is the Public Information Officer with Southern California Edison, and he will be sharing the latest update on the decommissioning of San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station. And just to let you know, the meeting is being recorded, so it will be on our YouTube channel, and we'll be able to share it with others. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, and I'm going to step out of the way so you guys can see.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you. And you know, as we were just saying, you know, since December of 2020, a lot has happened at the site. We had issued our notice of deconstruction, and we were really, you know, during 2020, putting the last of the spent nuclear fuel into the dry storage facility. We were moving a large piece of equipment, the Unit 1 reactor pressure vessel, offsite, and really doing a lot of the prep work to get ready for what happened last year, which was a lot of activity in terms of dismantling and dismantling the plant. So a lot has happened, and so I'm happy to be here to be able to update you on all of that. When we talk about decommissioning the plant, when we entered into this process, we established this goal and these principles: safety, stewardship, and engagement. Safety, obviously, is always very important to us, whether it's a operating nuclear plant or one in decommissioning. When you're decommissioning, it's much more of a focus on industrial safety, because you are tearing down things, and the site is constantly changing as buildings come down, different work streams happen, and so you really have to pay attention to where you are on site and what's going on, and in terms of making sure that that workers are safe as they're going about and doing their work, because it is much different. In terms of stewardship, we want to make sure that as we go through this dismantlement phase, we're taking care of the environment around us, because it is a beautiful location to be on. We've got San Onofre State Beach to the north and south. We've got the Pacific Ocean right next to us. So as we go through the dismantlement and we're doing tearing down buildings, we're making sure that dust is mitigated, and we do the things that we need to do in terms of monitoring to make sure that we're not impacting the environment as we go through this process. And then in terms of engagement, it's opportunities like this. It's making sure that people have information about what we're doing through this dismantlement phase, because it is something that people don't experience very often. There's a dozen or so nuclear plants that have been decommissioned and dismantled over the years, but not something that happens every day. So we want to make sure that people have all the information they need on what's happening at SOMS. And we provide that in a number of different ways, through our website, through community engagement panel meetings that happen quarterly. For Oceanside, Rob Howard is the community engagement panel representative, and he formerly worked at SOMS, so a great resource for folks on all things nuclear. And so that's an important piece of what we do. A little bit of SOMS plant history. There were 3 reactors located on the SOMS site throughout the years, beginning in 1968 when Unit 1 came online. It was a very small reactor, and that operated until 1992, and then was partially decommissioned. And then Units 2 and 3 came online in the early 1980s. They operated to essentially 2012, and then were permanently retired in 2013. The reason for that was the issue that we had with the replacement steam generators. So that project did not go as planned. And subsequently, the decision was made to go ahead and retire the plant rather than try and operate at either reduced power or do some other remedy to get the plant going again. So in terms of spent fuel storage, really we've been storing spent fuel on site since the first refueling outage that we had on site, so over 50 years. First in wet storage, which is in a large spent fuel pool, and then in dry storage since 2003. When we talk about decommissioning, it's really a long-term process. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission gives nuclear plants 60 years to decommission. What does that mean? It means you're dismantling all of the structures that were involved in the operation of the plant, and you're decontaminating the site to a level, we're going below NRC standards, but to a level that the NRC deems as safe, which would be 25 millirem of dose a year. We all get about 620 millirem of dose a year just from living. So very, very small amount. And that way the land can be repurposed for something else. Where we're located on Camp Pendleton, once we completely decommission the site, we'll turn the land back over to the Navy and end our lease with them, and they'll use it for their purposes. So currently, we're within the first two dotted red lines here, major decommissioning work. And that is removing all of the above grade structures and some of the below grade structures that are involved in the operation of the plant. The long bar, all fuel and dry storage, extends out because there currently is no place to move the spent fuel to. So we need to store it on site, and that's sort of open-ended at this point, but we are anticipating or planning through at least 2051 that spent fuel will be on site. Once that's gone, then we will do the final site restoration, working with the Navy on how they want the land to be when they receive it back.
I'm sorry, I'm a blind person. Did I say 2051?
2051, yeah.
And that's when you're thinking to turn it back over to the Navy?
That's our hope, yeah. So in terms of making progress, you can see just from February of 2021 to November, all of those buildings were gone, and we have
Did that freeze up on you, John?
no, I was just
the
trying to use
laser? Yeah,
pointer.
I don't know that it works.
Okay, so this big pile here is crushed concrete from a lot of the buildings that we dismantled. And if you look here, you can see everything that's covered in green is no longer there. So we've dismantled all of those structures. And we had to do that because we're located on just 85 acres. So there's not a lot of space to do a lot of the work that needs to be done. So we needed to clear those outbuildings first, and then create the space to where we could do the concrete crushing operation. This building up here was a large office complex building. That's now a rail yard, and that'll help facilitate taking things off site. We've removed these structures on top of the Unit 2 turbine building. We're now looking at removing these structures on top of the Unit 3 turbine building. So the turbine buildings are a little bit different than some of the other buildings we've taken down, which have been mostly either warehouse structures or the diesel generator buildings, which were reinforced concrete structures, very robust, that took a lot of time to knock down. The turbine buildings are a lot of steel, and so there's a lot of cutting that goes on in terms of both those pieces of equipment that were on top of the turbine building, which is where the electricity was generated. So you had a high pressure turbine and 3 low pressure turbines hooked up to a generator, and all of that has to be cut up with torches in order to be shipped off site. A lot of the material in the turbine building is going to be recycled. So we have millions of pounds of recyclable metal in there. And so we'll be taking that, shipping it to a facility that's outside Las Vegas, and then it will be shipped off for recycling. And then the steam generators themselves have tens of thousands of titanium tubes in them. So we'll be removing those tubes, and those will be recycled as well. So that work's going on. We should be done with the turbine building project in the 2023 timeframe. And once we're done with that, that will open up an area to where we can then attack the buildings surrounding the containment domes, and then eventually the containment domes themselves. The rail yard is very important to us. We're going to be shipping off about 1 billion pounds of material during this process, and that will involve more than 5,000 rail cars to get that done. So what we did was we created these 5 spurs here, another track that goes all the way into the plant, so that we can stage about 30 rail cars there. So they're always ready to be filled, with that pile of concrete and other material, and be able to be shipped out. And all this material is going outside of California. Nothing is staying in the state. So it'll be going either to Clive, Utah, or West Texas, or La Paz, Arizona, or, as I said, that facility outside of Las Vegas. So everything is going to be leaving the state. And we should be done with this rail yard, ready to go, really probably within the next week, 2 weeks, like that. So, yeah, so we'll be shipping those out. Inside the containment domes, a lot of work is happening. This is really the key area for the project to make sure that we stay on track and on schedule. So a lot of the components in there that were either surrounding the reactor or where the fuel was are being cut up. This is the core barrel. So inside the core barrel was the reactor core. That's where all the spent nuclear fuel, that's where the nuclear fuel was stored while it was operating. And so we're hired a contractor that specializes in doing this particular type of work, and they construct this piece of equipment specifically for songs to work on the songs site. And it's a large circular saw that goes around and cuts this piece of metal up. And this metal is activated with cobalt-60. So it'll be stored, it's what's called greater than Class C waste. So currently there's no place, much like spent nuclear fuel, to store that. So we'll be storing it on site with our spent nuclear fuel in our spent nuclear fuel storage systems. So we'll be having some additional canisters of this material there. In the upper picture, that's the reactor pressure vessel head that's being removed, and that will be cut up. That's not greater than Class C. It's not highly activated, so that'll be cut up and shipped off site. But the other material that is more activated will be remaining on site. So once we have all of that done, let's say in 2029, this is the only things that will be remaining: the independent spent fuel storage installation, the switch yard, which connects San Diego Gas and Electric's grid to Southern California Edison, and the seawall walkway and riprap that fronts the ocean. Everything else will be stabilized with fill dirt, and then, at that point, really the focus is on getting the spent fuel moved off site and everything else. And then once we're done with that, it'll be we'll do the final site restoration, as I said. So we'll be utilizing local fill for the stabilization. We've got some bluffs in the back where those 3 tanks are up there that we'll be using that material to stabilize this area. And so in 2029, if you're standing on the beach to the south and you look north, that will be the new view. Everything will have been gone by then. So any questions on any of that?
So what happens between 2029 and 2051?
We just work on getting the spent fuel offsite. And really the focus is on securing the spent fuel. And that's kind of the next part of my presentation is sort of how we do that. But I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions about the dismantlement or anything regarding that. Yes.
Where will the fuel actually be located when you're at that final slide? You said in 2029.
The fuel will still be here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So these are our two storage systems, and you know, that's where it will stay. And then and so talking about spent fuel and why, you know, it's safely stored while it's here. This is me sitting 6 feet above 20 tons of spent nuclear fuel. I don't have to wear any special clothing or radiation dosimetry, you know, to read the dose I'm getting, because the shielding of these systems is so good with the concrete and the steel that the radiation can't really penetrate out in any significant manner. And that's why we chose the system, because we are, you know, we have the walkway, you know, that's fairly close to this. We have a beach right there and everything else. So we chose a system that has this tremendous shielding to it. And that's why none of the radiation dose gets out to any significant extent. And spent nuclear fuel itself is a little pellet. I have some simulated ones here. And so these pellets, all the radionuclides that you see listed, they're all locked inside this pellet, and it would take 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit heat to melt this pellet and release any of those radionuclides. So, you know, when you're talking about earthquakes and tsunamis and all these other types of things, they will still not have any effect on this little pellet. And that is by design. We design spent fuel storage systems with a concept known as defense in depth. And the first layer of that defense is this ceramic pellet, which locks in, you know, the U-235, the plutonium, the cesium-137, the strontium-90, everything is in here and can't get out. So in our storage systems, as I said, we have two of them. We have 123 canisters of spent nuclear fuel on site. So it's a lot of canisters, and it's going to take time to transport all of those off-site. It could take anywhere from 10 to 20 years to transport all those off-site, depending on how the system develops to do that. In our Orano system, we have 50. In the Holtec system, which is the one we just we just finished loading in August of 2020. We have 73. Both of them feature just, you know, incredible technology to protect the spent nuclear fuel. The Orano system is a horizontal system, and the Holtec is a vertical system. And these systems are great because they're all just convection cooling, so they don't require there's no water involved, there's no pumps, there's no electricity needed. You know, the ambient air just flows in on this system, the bottom, circulates around the canister and goes up, you know, 10 to 30 degrees warmer, dissipating the heat. With the Holtec system, it goes in, comes down, circulates, and goes out, you know, one of these chimneys. Same circumstance in terms of the warm air. And that's all it takes. And inside the canisters are the spent fuel assemblies, which contain, you know, the fuel. But there's no moving parts or anything. There's no water in the canisters. It's just helium, which is inert, which prevents corrosion. So these canisters have a service life of more than 100 years. We use 5/8 inch stainless steel, 316L stainless steel, which is corrosion resistant. So this helps us to be able to keep the fuel safely stored for as long as it's on site. And that's important. So we went with 5/8 inch stainless steel. A lot in the industry use 1/2 inch. Many areas, many nuclear plants use 304 stainless steel because they aren't in highly corrosive environments. We did some extra things with our canisters that reduce type of corrosion effects called chloride-induced stress corrosion cracking. So the welds on our Holtec canisters are laser peened, which was a innovative process to do that. And the seismic rating for the systems are 1.5 G. So we measure seismic motion and peak ground acceleration. And the plants themselves, units 2 and 3, were built to 0.67 G. These are more than twice that. So if we had a large earthquake, the safest place to be would be on this dry fuel storage system because nothing is going to happen to it. The systems can be inundated by 50 to 125 feet of water and still perform their safety functions. And as I said, service life of 100 years or more. So, so the fuel will be safe as long as it's here. Certainly 100 years, we should have this issue solved and be able to move the material off-site. Because really what it comes down to is there's really 2 main reasons for why this spent fuel should not be stored at SOGs. One is that the federal government is in partial breach of their contract to remove the fuel from the site. That was supposed to start happening in 1998. The Department of Energy was supposed to come and begin picking up fuel and moving it to a federal repository. The other reason is we're on Camp Pendleton, and the Marines have a national security mission that does not involve storing spent fuel. And so for those 2 reasons, this fuel should be prioritized to be moved off-site. In terms of seismic and all that other stuff, it doesn't really have an effect on the fuel. No one has ever been harmed by spent nuclear fuel in the entire history of spent nuclear fuel. The environment has never been harmed by spent nuclear fuel in the entire history of spent nuclear fuel. So it's not that we need to worry about the spent nuclear fuel doing something. It's just that we have the 2 very specific reasons for why it should be moved. In terms of risk reduction, this kind of shows a little bit of that. So when the reactors were operating, we had 82 emergency action levels, and those were essentially accident scenarios that we needed to plan to be able to mitigate while we were operating. Once the reactors were shut down and all the fuel was taken out of the reactor cores, we dropped down to 18 accident scenarios. Now with all the fuel in dry storage, we have 3, and none of those involve any radiological material leaving the site. So it's all going to be contained there no matter what. And that's why, I get back to the 2 main reasons for why this needs to go. Because it is going to be safely stored while it's here. Yes.
Are you allowed to tell us what those 3 worst case scenarios are?
They're not, I wouldn't say they were called worst case scenarios because they are, in nuclear, you have certain things that could happen. They classify emergencies. And so we can only have the 2 lowest classifications, and that doesn't involve, sort of evacuation and everything else. It's really security related. So I can say that. And so that's why we don't have the emergency sirens anymore. That's why we don't have the 10-mile emergency planning zone anymore. That's why all those things went away, because nothing can happen that would trigger those. that's the major difference. So, you know, that's why, you know, at the bottom of the, you know, that's the big point. No offsite radiological release. So everything stays within the fence.
Question. If that fuel were stolen, can it be repurposed inside those little pellets?
Yeah, it could be recycled. Yeah, it retains 95% of its energy potential. So we don't recycle in this country. In France and some other countries, they do. France principally recycle, so they put their fuel through 2 to 3 cycles before it's ultimately disposed of. But we,
I know this customer.
huh?
I know this customer.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at it in this country and then decided not to. But we ended up shipping 270 fuel assemblies to Morris, Illinois back in the 70s because they thought there was going to be a recycling plant built. And it never happened. So the fuel assemblies are still there and they'll stay there. But there's new reactor designs that are coming up that could use this spent nuclear fuel as fresh fuel. And so Oklo is a company in Silicon Valley that's looking at a reactor design that could utilize spent nuclear fuel.
So, oh, I'm sorry, just along those same lines, you mentioned France. So is there any foreign market for the spent fuel that we have?
Yeah, we're not allowed to transfer spent nuclear fuel, nuclear material to other countries. So, you know, it sort of stays. Now, in Europe, they do that. You know, so Switzerland will send spent fuel to France to be reprocessed, and they'll send it back, and they have those kind of sharing agreements. We don't. We tend to keep it here, and that was kind of why why it was sort of killed, because there were these proliferation concerns, because you do have you know, plutonium in the spent fuel, but to separate the plutonium out, you would really have to have a nation that had that technology to be able to do that. It's not something that, you know, somebody could get a hold of a spent fuel canister. They weigh 50 tons anyway, so you're not going to be transporting it. You know, yeah, no. So it really was kind of a strange thing to kill the program. I would think, you know, the United States would be able to protect those sorts of things, because, you know, we did get down blended nuclear material from Russia when they reduced the amount of nuclear missiles that they had. And so nuclear plants in this country used Russian uranium in their reactors and things like that. So, and you can get what's called MOX fuel, which is a mixed oxide fuel, which has some plutonium and some uranium in it. In fact, most reactors, through their, you know, through the 6-year life cycle of the fuel, will be fissioning plutonium as, you know, how they generate heat through that process. So you start off fissioning the uranium-235, but then when you create plutonium, that'll fission as well.
So my question, it goes back just a little bit further, but you know, these 5/8 containers, 5/8 thick stainless steel containers that are keeping the spent fuel. You said that just the ambient air is going to come out 30 degrees warmer.
Mm-hmm.
So these containers are generating heat themselves. I mean, not a lot of heat, obviously, at 30
Right.
degrees on an ambient heat exchange, but there's still some heat there all the time.
Yeah, so what you're getting is radioactive decay, and that's what's causing the heat.
Generated, okay.
Yeah, and so, you know, the hottest fuel assembly we have, and, you know, fuel assembly at Solms is, so it's like, it's this. It's about 14 feet tall. This is just a mock. But in the whole Holtec canisters can hold up to 37 of these. So the hottest fuel assembly we have on site gives off as much heat as a hairdryer, about 1,500 watts. But you put 37 hair dryers together, you know,
You guys, I mean, they're gonna be warm.
yeah, you're gonna get some heat. But, you know, that's reducing over time. And so, you know, the canisters that we had stored since 2003 are cooling quite well.
Like what percentage, when you're saying,
Yeah, the radioactivity, the radiological hazard of spent fuel is about 1/1000 of what it was when it came out of the reactor after about 40 years.
40?
Yeah, so the really hot radioisotopes, things that are really radioactive, have very short half-lives. So they don't stay around very long. So when you talk about things like Chernobyl, the radioisotope that was the issue at Chernobyl was iodine-131. And that only has an 8-day half-life. So after we shut down, 3-4 months after that, all of the iodine-131 was gone. So we didn't have, that's why you don't need KI pills and you know, all those types of things anymore, because it's not present in the fuel anymore. And that reduces the heat and some of the other short-lived isotopes being gone. Really, you isolate this mostly for the cesium-137 and the strontium-90, those types of things that have 30-year half-lives. So by about 300 years, those are gone. And then you're just left with uranium-238, which 95% of this fuel is uranium-238, which is the natural uranium you find in the ground here in Oceanside. But it's concentrated, obviously. So when things are concentrated, they're more of a hazard than when they're dispersed. So that's why you isolate it. So, so as I said, you know, we don't want the fuel at Songs any longer than it has to be. And so last year, in March, we released a suite of plans that really looks at what we can do to remove this fuel from the site as a singular nuclear utility. What can we do? So the strategic plan looks at sort of the national picture. Where are we in terms of the spent fuel management program for the Department of Energy at the federal level? What might need to change in order to really get this program kickstarted and moving in the right direction? Like one of the things that we found was we should probably have a standalone agency that just deals with this issue, that is not subject to administration changes and political winds and those types of things, but just has a dedicated focus on this issue, much like Canada does. They have a nuclear waste management organization that is a couple of years away from naming a couple of sites for their deep geologic repository. And so we have a lot to learn from how they're going through the process.
Is that a private sector organization or a public sector?
No, it'd be a public sector. So
How do you keep politics out of it?
well, it's difficult because, you know, we kind of, you know, think of like TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, or maybe the Bonneville Power Administration, but you look at, you know, you look at those and, you know, presidents come in and they want to privatize them and sell them off and those types of things. So you do have, you know, those concerns. You would have that with any, but because of the funding mechanism, you know, you would have the funding there for that. And that's why it needs to be a federal part of the federal program. And then we did a conceptual transportation plan that looked at, you know, what are all the steps that would be needed to transport the material offsite, and an action plan, which kind of tells Southern California Edison what we need to do to be ready when there's something available, because there are steps that we can take prior to a site being named and those types of things. And part of that was choosing canisters that are transportable. So they're multi-purpose canisters for storage and transportation. And so when there is a site available, these canisters will be taken out of their storage modules put into a transportation cask, put on the back of the train car, and shipped off-site. But we also realized that really we can't do it alone. And so we, with our partners, launched this Action for Spent Fuel Solutions Now coalition, which we've gotten great support from San Diego County Board of Supervisors. Supervisor Jim Desmond is the co-chair of the group, and along with Orange County, and Lisa Bartlett is the other co-chair of the coalition. And so what we're trying to do is bring folks together so that their voices can be heard, because right now there's no motive force to get action going on this issue, because we're talking about such long time frames. And when you have something that, you know, is good for 100 years, you know, there's no impetus to act quickly on that. So we need to solve this issue. We shouldn't leave it for additional generations to figure out. We need to do it right now, because of climate change. There's a lot of focus on new nuclear energy in this country. A lot of states are reversing their nuclear moratoriums that they had in place. And so, you know, there's the potential that we're going to be generating a lot more spent nuclear fuel. So we really need to start figuring out the back end of this fuel cycle. So I would encourage you to go to the website and sign up. It's free. You'll get information. That won't be spamming you and that sort of thing, but we'll be providing you updates on what's going on. And Crystal, I don't know if you wanted to add anything from your experience with that.
And you know what, I'll give a little update on where we are with the Action for Spent Fuel Solutions Now. But I have a question. Are you guys resuming tours? And if so, do people get to see where the canisters are stored? Because along with the supervisor, we got to see that and it was fascinating.
Yeah, so we have restarted public walking tours. And then we also do tours for elected officials and others. And yeah, so you can go to the website and sign up, and we hold them on Saturday mornings, and you know, they run a couple hours. And so
they're fascinating because you get to see for yourself. I mean, we have a similar picture of standing there. You can feel the heat coming out. You get to, you know, we got to see is it a Geiger counter that
right, yeah,
you know, that shows you the level of radiation. It's way less than my microwave in my kitchen.
Mhm.
And for some reason I stand in front of all the time. I don't know why. But it's really fascinating to see it live and in person. It puts it in a better perspective.
Yeah.
And then also a comment on safety. The city of Oceanside is a contracted partner for safety, as well as the county of San Diego. So they are implementers of any safety plans if we were to need it. But like you said, we're not in evacuation mode anymore. But thankfully, the city of Oceanside participates, at least from the fire and police standpoint.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we did that other decommissioned nuclear plants did not do. We maintained a relationship with emergency response organizations and first responders in our area. So Orange County, San Diego County, Oceanside, a lot of different partners that we have in that, and we're funding that partnership until the spent nuclear fuel is removed from the site. So at whatever point that is, we'll continue to fund local emergency responders, and we continue to do emergency drills and those types of things. They're just you know, much more reduced because there are fewer things that can happen. So.
And I have one more comment.
Yeah.
And because you touched on it, but I don't know if everyone, because I didn't completely grasp this. SoCal Edison would like to remove the fuel. You would like more than anything to remove the fuel. The federal government, our federal government, has failed them and has not held up their obligation to take possession of the fuel. So SoCal Edison would love to.
We would, yes, because
Give that land back.
right, we would like to, because you know, you get people on social media saying, oh, you know, the spent fuel is a profit center and all this kind of stuff, and And it's really not. What it is we maintain the fuel, and then we essentially have to sue the federal government every couple of years to recoup the money that we spent because of there being a partial breach of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which, you know, they were supposed to remove the fuel. So nuclear plants all across the country are constantly suing the federal government in order to recoup their fees for storing the spent fuel on site. It turns out to be, you know, a lot of money every year that's spent for this. So removing the fuel and taking it to an interim storage site and then deep geologic repository would certainly be far more, one, it would be more efficient and probably more economical to a solution to do that. So, but, you know, sometimes, you know, we don't always get back as much money as we spend on this from the federal government. So, you know, it's, but all the money that we do get back gets, you know, after legal fees and things like that, gets returned to customers.
Obviously, it's not enough of a consequence to the federal government to put any priority on it. So how do you accelerate a program that, you know, that they don't feel pressure from?
Well, that's really, you know, we've got some folks at the Department of Energy right now who are putting a priority on this. The Office of Nuclear Energy, the DOE, had just last year put out a request for information on a consent-based siting process for a federal interim storage facility. And so we're submitting a response. Our community engagement panel is submitting a response. The coalition is submitting a response. And they're going to take this information, which is due tomorrow, to put together what a consent-based process looks like. Because Yucca Mountain was not a consent-based process. It was essentially, here, you're taking this. And consequently, Nevada did not want to take it. And so that ended up, you know, after spending $12–13 billion on that project, it's gone away. And it's essentially abandoned for the most part. So what we're doing now with the DOE leading the way is developing a consent so that a community understands what the benefits are of having an interim facility, and they can, you know, choose to accept it. And once they choose to accept it, the process becomes that much easier to accomplish.
Are there communities that are expressing interest in being a recipient of all this?
Not yet, but we're really not to that stage yet. Once they get this consent-based process in place, then they go out and start soliciting communities that want to house this facility. And this process has worked very well in Canada. They've gone out and worked with communities, tribal nations and others to really, you know, kind of nail down 2 or 3 locations that are geologically able to be repositories, because that's, you have to find the right rock to put it in. That's first and foremost, and then you have to find a community near the right rock that wants to accept it. So it's a yeah, and that's why these things take so long.
We're only 25 years into it already, you know, they've reached contracts, so
They got 50
what's
years
another
to go.
50 years?
Okay, so is there a budget involved with this plan that the community is willing to do? I mean, is it right now to say, this is what the cost on our case will be, this is what the cost, this is what the liability will be? I mean, is there a full,
Yeah, that'll all have to be worked out.
no, I mean, that's not in this plan that's due on Friday or
So that's
tomorrow?
what the, so once the RFI is completed
Yes.
and they've done their analysis, what that does is gives them the ability to go back to Congress and ask for funding allocations, so the appropriations committee for communities that are expressing interest, giving them money to go through the process. So let's just say Oceanside, we know they wouldn't, said, you know what, we would like to explore this. It will give them the ability to receive funding from the federal government with no obligation to ultimately be a interim storage facility, but to do the community engagement and roll out the plans, hire the consultants, it would give them a funding mechanism from the federal government for that. But you have to complete the RFI, the analysis, and then request the funds from appropriations, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's 30 years of it.
And that's it. I mean, because really, you know, Yucca Mountain still to this day remains the law of the land. That is the only place you can send spent nuclear fuel to. So a lot needs to change from a legislative perspective to sort of open up that process and be able to have these other options available. And you have, you know, 2 private facilities, interim storage facilities being developed now, one in New Mexico and one in West Texas. The West Texas one did get an NRC license, but the state passed legislation that prevented the import of spent nuclear fuel. So again,
But not because they're against spent nuclear fuel, it's because they identified that site as ideal for fracking.
and same in New Mexico too. They're concerned that, you know, the spent nuclear fuel would somehow affect.
Until we find this, we haven't identified another site to make it legal yet.
So no, I mean, no, and that's really what is going to be undertaken. I mean, back in the 1950s, the National Academies of Sciences said, you know, you should put this in salt beds. And, you know, that's the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico, which stores nuclear bomb waste, is in salt beds in New Mexico. And it's a great place to store things that you don't want to see again. One of the things with Yucca Mountain is they want it to be permanent, but then they put in a 50-year retrievability clause because they weren't sure whether maybe we'll do recycling. We're not sure, and it's hard to make it something permanent when you are making it temporary. Right. So yeah, so it's kind of, so hopefully, you know, this process will. There's a lot of things that need to be changed, but you know, the folks at DOE understand that they're working towards that. So really, for all of us in the industry, there's a renewed optimism that this is being addressed.
You can push those tours for that.
Yeah.
You show that optimism out in the community.
Yeah. So yeah. So through this coalition, that's kind of, you know, we hope that people will, you know, join in and we can show folks that there is an interest in getting this issue solved. It's not just, you know, the nuclear utility saying it, it's the surrounding community. So I would say if you want to stay informed with what's going on, again, you know, we do have the public walking tours. You can go to the website and sign up. You can sign up for our monthly update email if you go there. We send out 1 email a month that sort of summarizes all the things that have been going on and kind of some of the issues and things like that. And then you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We've done a lot of time-lapse videos of the buildings being dismantled that my grandkids really like. So you can see those.